Hi everyone, I'm Abigail. This is Bentley, and welcome to our first Two Kid Reviews interview. We are joined by writer-director Ross Venokur. Amongst other work, Mr. Venokur has written and directed the animated films Acorns Operation Crackdown, the movie Charming, which can be seen on Netflix, and Rally Road Racers, which is in theaters now.
Hey guys, so happy to be here.
Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you guys so much.
You have some great talent in Rally Road Racers. This is the third time you've directed comedy legend John Cleese. What is this like? And do you have any story for us interacting with or directing John Cleese?
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate to work with John 3 times. I actually have worked with him 4 times. I'll tell you that story in a minute too. But um, I grew up as a little kid in the early '80s, and Monty Python was everything to me and my friends. We just loved that. It would define comedy for us. So getting to work with John was so thrilling the first time, and then the fact that he keeps showing up in my movies and really appreciates the way I write is it's so gratifying. 7, 8-year-old, 10-year-old me thinks it's so cool. To answer your question about the story, I have 2 stories to tell you about John. One, when I worked with him on Charming. So I worked with him once, the first one on Operation Crackdown, like you said, and I actually flew out to England for that and worked with him in person because I wasn't going to miss the opportunity to work with him and miss him. And he was so polite and fun and funny, but he asked me why I bothered to fly all the way out there when I could just do it over a Zoom. But there was no way I was missing meeting him and working with him in person. And then when I worked with him on Charming, it was amazing because he actually told me, and I have this recorded somewhere. Thank goodness the mic was on. He told me that the parts I wrote for him in Charming, because he's 2 different characters in Charming, were the funniest lines anyone's ever written for him. So that was enormously gratifying to hear from John. I'm pretty sure he may say that to other people too, but it made me feel really good. And then the other story that a lot of people don't know about, to some do, is that in the middle of the pandemic, right when sort of the NFT craze was going on, right after this guy Beeple sold his art for $69 million, my brother and I decided that it would be funny to try to sell the Brooklyn Bridge, which I don't know if you guys know. It's like an old con. People said, like, you can believe that, I got a bridge to sell you. They're selling the Brooklyn Bridge. And we thought the funniest person in the world to sell the Brooklyn Bridge would be John Cleese. So on a lark, I just sent him an email saying, "Hey John, do you want to do an NFT and try to make $69 million and sell the Brooklyn Bridge?" And he wrote back to me a few minutes later, and I was still in California at the time, and he was randomly in Arizona renting a home to make a movie. So I flew out to Arizona, and we did a whole campaign where John Cleese sells the Brooklyn Bridge, and we ultimately sold it, but it got covered in Vanity Fair and all over the world. It was a big thing that happened for a moment. We didn't make $69 million, or even close to it.
That's so cool. It's crazy. I had never heard of a slow loris before this film. Which did you decide first? The slow loris or to have the setting be China?
Well, the truth is the movie had been set in a lot of places. It was originally in America, then it was in Australia, and then it was in China. And when it was in Australia, it was a koala, because the idea was always that it would be funny to have a character who's small and slow. Koalas are pretty slow in their movement and adorable, but he sees himself as, basically, he thinks he's Han Solo, but the rest of the world thinks he's a teddy bear. So I always thought that was a really funny idea. When we moved the movie to China, I suddenly realized koala made no sense. Also, Sing had come out at that point, and the koala had sort of been claimed by them. And so I was just looking around at animals that come from China, and I encountered the name slow loris. I don't think I knew what a slow loris was at that point, but I thought it was so funny. His name was Slow, sort of like the sloth from Zootopia. It's like he's slow is in his name, but he wants to be a race car driver. And then I saw it, and I realized we can make that character adorable, so it preserved the central characteristic of him, which he's really cute, and you don't expect him to race a car. So in this case, China came first, and then the slow loris.
Is it true that at one point you and your family almost moved to China?
It is true. We almost moved to China, but that was years ago. Before this, my first film that you guys mentioned, which came out eventually under the name Acorns Operation Crackdown, was supposed to happen in China. We were moving to Shanghai, And about we were getting ready. My daughters were really young. We had gotten rid of our house. We'd gotten rid of our car. We packed everything up and put it in storage. We were about 2 weeks away from moving, and the Chinese studio just pulled out and unapologetically and said they're not going to make it. So my wife and I didn't quite know what to do. The school year had started, so we just kind of looked at each other and decided we had one car left. We're going to go on a road trip. So we ended up driving around the country, which we now do pretty often, for about a year. And we started homeschooling our kids, which we called adventure schooling. And I would work in the mornings. I'd get up really early and write, and about 9:30, I'd be done. And then we just spend the day on adventures together. Um, and we never moved to China. The movie ended up going in Toronto a year later. So we moved up there.
From what I understand, at one point the movie was titled The Fast and the Furious. Then for a long time, there's going to be Silk Road Rally, which is similar to the movie Cannonball Run, before it finally became known as Rally Road Racers. How are the changes made?
Well, that is a very accurate history of the title of this movie. It was when I wrote the first draft, I think roughly maybe a little over 10 years ago, because it was before I made even those first two movies. It was called The Fast and the Furious, and I always loved that name. And I thought it was really funny and really clever. And I really thought it would stick for a long time. But as the movie progressed, we realized that the Fast and the Furious was a large, thriving film franchise, obviously. And since we weren't making the movie at Universal, we were advised that it was not a good idea to kind of go up against them because they're probably very protective of it. And I kept fighting for it. But then when we moved the movie to China, the Silk Road Rally was a very natural name for me because that was the course they were on. And like you said, Cannonball Run and this other movie from my childhood called the Gumball Rally, it all the titles of those movies often are the course that they're running. So I thought it was very natural. And then ultimately, when Viva came into the picture to distribute the movie, they felt that they could have a more success with a different title. And so they suggested a bunch of titles. We went back and forth, and we eventually settled on Rally Road Racers, which I actually really love that title. It feels to me a little bit more like a franchise. Like you could see that in the next movie they'd race across Europe, and the movie after that they'd race across America. You could have a lot of fun with that.
What was your favorite part of the movie?
My favorite part of the film is probably still the aha sequence. I absolutely love that sequence. I fought really hard to keep it. I fought really hard to be able to pay for that song. That song was very expensive, but I had a lot of support from Deepak Nair is the producer of the film, and he figured out a way to make it work. And it was really supposed to be the easiest sequence of the film to make, and it ended up becoming the hardest and most expensive. My original idea was I wanted to differentiate each of the four races because I was afraid if you had four races it would get boring. So we came up with a different idea for each of them, and for that one I had the idea to use this song, which I loved because I was a child when that video came out, and I thought it would be a cool way. We didn't have a lot of budget, we didn't have a lot of resources, and my original idea was, since my storyboard artists were so talented, let's just draw the storyboards and put them in the movie because that video looks like storyboards. And that's what we did for a long time. But ultimately, when we rendered the rest of the movie and we saw it didn't really sit well together, so we had to go back and redo the whole thing, and it became very complicated to make that sequence. But I love it, and it seems to be something that people are really one of the things people are most excited about. So I think that might be my favorite. I also really love the sequence towards the end of Act Two, beginning of Act Three, when G's, in having his Dark Night of the Soul, as Abby says, and he's walking and the saxophone music's playing. I love that sequence.
The aha song was our favorite part as well. So this movie was supposed to come out a couple of years ago, but the pandemic changed things, right? In general, when making a movie, how important is it to be able to adjust and just roll with the punches?
It's extremely important. I think probably in any movie situation, but in my experience in independent animation, it's very important. When I set out to make these movies, I know that I'm already up against a bunch of obstacles, right? We don't have the same amount of time as a studio. We don't have any of the resources or practically any of them. And our budget is sometimes, a tenth or less of a studio movie. So, going in on day one, you're not going to get everything you want. You just need to show up and be ready to, we call it horse trading. The studio is going to say, you can have that, but if you want that, you've got to lose 5 things from this list because there's just a limited amount of money. So it's built into independent animation that you have to be able to roll with the punches. no one expected the pandemic to show up and to totally change. We were kind of working remotely because I was in California. The front end of the movie was being done in Montreal. There was people in London, people in Mumbai, but still, with each of those places, people were going to work. So we had to send everyone home, make sure everyone had the right equipment, because you don't just need a computer to do CG animation. You need you need powerful computers, and you need great Wi-Fi connections and all that kind of stuff. So we got everyone set up, and we rolled with it, and we just kept the movie going. And and a lot of projects weren't that lucky. A lot of projects shut down during the pandemic and they never came back. So somehow we just walked that tightrope, and everyone kept showing up. But the movie was supposed to be made in 18 months, and it took over 4 years to make. So it definitely took a hit.
How much does the end product look like your original concept?
It's a very interesting question. It actually, in spirit, looks a lot like my original concept. As I mentioned before, or as you guys mentioned to me, the movie went through a lot of iterations, and it started in America, then it went to Australia, and then it came to China. But it was always about this sort of cute little fuzzy animal who saw himself as a big heroic star of a movie type, a Han Solo or Indiana Jones, and wanted to be a racer, even though the rest of the world didn't see him that way. And that premise evolved a little and isn't fully baked into the Rally Road Racers. But the general idea of an underdog hero stepping out of his comfort zone, doing something that people don't expect of him, and entering a cross-country race and winning it was there from the beginning. And so in that sense, it's really preserved the spirit through all 10 years of development.
What ways, if any, have your daughters influenced your work?
My daughters have complete and total influence over my work. So much of what I do is uh, because of them, because of the joy they bring me, and also just because of jokes around the house, things we talk about. But never more directly have they influenced my work than with Charming. Charming, I would basically read my daughters to sleep every night for most of their, or I don't want to say most of their lives, all of their childhood, and now I have a 21-year-old and 18-year-old. They don't ask me to read them to sleep anymore, but I would if they asked. But we read a lot of fairy tales, a lot of classic books like that, and along the way we realized everyone's marrying Prince Charming. Snow White's marrying him, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty. It'd be kind of funny if it was the same guy. So that whole movie came directly from my relationship with my daughters, and it was a really important movie to me, and really, really a beautiful film. And ultimately, that one didn't fully work out for me. I finished my movie, I finished it, and then by the time people in control of it sold to Netflix, they had come in, and after I was done, redone some things, I added some stuff, and to this day, I've never watched it. I can't get myself to watch the version on Netflix because my version was so exactly what I wanted it to be.
We would love to see a copy of your version.
I will get you guys a copy. And then you guys can start your petition to Netflix to get them to put the director's cut up right next to the other one.
We'll definitely do that.
I want you to use your influence as Hollywood's newest power interviewing team to get Netflix to put my movie back up on their streaming service.
Of course. For people who are our age and are interested in a career in film, how did you get into the film industry, and what advice would you have for us?
I'll tell you how I got into the film industry, but then I'm going to have very different advice for you guys because the world has changed quite a bit since I got in the film industry. I started out by moving out to California, and I got a job as a PA, production assistant, on a music video. And while I was working on that music video, I learned that MTV was hiring writers for a show, and you had to submit jokes. So I submitted a bunch of jokes, and amazingly, they hired me. I was 21 at the time, and that was the beginning of my career. Since then I've only written, and then eventually I added producing and directing to it. But that's how I got started, which was a very beautiful and blessed way to get into it. From there, I started writing some children's books, and then I got into feature film writing and television, and it's just been it was great. The world is very different now. Hollywood is very different. We're going through a strike right now. We've gone through another strike, which really changed things in 2008. But also there's all this technology and this amazing ability for people to just make their own content. Every kid out there If you don't have your own phone, chances are your parents have a phone that acts as a camera. There's all this free software online. So, and there's all these outlets. You could put stuff up on social media and wherever you want, YouTube. And so my advice is just make something that's authentically you and start putting it out there. I think that the things that appeal to other people, there's content that is authentic. So, and each of us is unique. So if you're just speaking from your honest place and what's true and real to you, it'll connect with other people, and good content will find good audiences.
Can you tell my dad to get me a phone?
I can tell your dad to get you a phone, but I have no influence over your father. Even though I've learned we have the same name, I don't think that we're at the level yet where he's taking advice on how to raise you guys from me. Maybe down the line.
What would you say are the most important skills to have to be a film writer or director?
All right. Well, I think they're slightly different, but ultimately maybe the same. To be a writer, you really have to learn to put the story first. You have to check your ego and not get so excited by the joke you just wrote or the amazingly clever sentence you just wrote, and really be able to distill and filter, is this right for the story? Is this right for the character? Does this move everything forward? It's very easy to get enamored with your own writing and start putting things in there like clever turns of phrases and hilarious jokes that have nothing to do with anything, and that ultimately will take the audience out of your movie and maybe be the reason why you don't get your movie made, because it doesn't feel cohesive and like one vision, one story moving forward. I think that's really important comedy. I see people do that. I've done that many times with jokes, where you hang on to a joke and you really should let it go. For directing, it's different, because directing, you're telling the story, but you're also leading a team, especially in, I have way more experience in animation, but you're leading a team of so many people. And I think the most important skill for me as a director is to set a tone of appreciation for everyone who's on your crew and all the artists and all the people who are showing up with incredible passion and talent. And they're dedicated, in the case of this movie, people dedicated 4 years of their lives to help make this. And so I think it's really important that you respect everyone for what they're great at, and you create a bit of a policy that people aren't afraid to tell you if they have an idea or if they think something's not working. And this is what gets me back to the writer's skill set. Maybe I just do this because I was a writer at heart, and I started as a writer, not as a visual artist in the film industry. But my policy as a director is best idea wins. It doesn't have to be my idea. It can be anyone's idea. In fact, I have a cool story about that. So there's a guy on my movie named Mark Anthony, and he was the story coordinator. So I don't know if you know what that is. In an animation movie, each department has a coordinator, and the story coordinator oversees all the storyboard artists and the edit to make sure that everything's moving on schedule. And so it's normally, not exactly a creative position. It's more of a administrative and making sure everything's working on schedule. But when it came time to write the rap that Veragosa sings in the movie, he breaks into rap when he first meets G. I was messing around with it. I didn't really have the rap down yet. It was an idea that came in late. And he took it upon himself. He went home that night and wrote a rap, and he brought it back and said, "I hope this isn't somebody to get." And I would say, the majority of the rap that he used to be named Veragosa, but his name is Vainglorious now, that Vainglorious sings, John Cleese's character, was written by Mark Anthony. But when I read it, I was like, "Oh, this is great. This is perfect." It doesn't have to be from me. It's just from the team. So I think the idea of having gratitude, creating an environment where everyone feels they can contribute, that to me is a very important skill as a director.
Did you watch a lot of TV and movies growing up? And which ones were the biggest influence on you?
I did love cartoons growing up. I was a big fan. I loved Saturday morning cartoons, and I loved after school cartoons. One of my favorites, which I was borderline obsessed with for a while, was the Smurfs. I always loved the Smurfs. And I loved the whole sort of classic Hanna-Barbera line of Josie and the Pussycats, Jabberjaw, Speed Buggy, and Wacky Races. I really love too, which you see a huge influence of Wacky Races in Rally Road Racers. But probably the movie or TV show that the biggest influence on me was the Muppet movie, actually, the original Muppet movie. When I was a young, I think that came out in '80, so I was probably 7. My mom took me into the city. We grew up right outside New York City to see it, and we sat in the front row of the balcony, and it was just like a dream day to be. I was hanging out with my mom, watching the Muppet movie. I was so into the Muppets, and I loved it so much that at the end, I turned to my mom and said, "Can we watch it again?" And amazingly, she said yes, and we just stayed in our seats and we let them play the movie again, and we watched the whole movie over again. And Jim Henson and the Muppets is a huge reason why I got into entertainment, and I love writing for families, and I love writing for children. And it's definitely the reason I play the banjo. Kermit the Frog, that day, I realized he and I were soulmates.
I love the Muppet movie. I also love the Muppet movie. Is there any project that you have in the works that you can tell us about? And any chance that we can see G and Shelby again in a future project?
I really hope you get to see G and Shelby again in a future project. It's too early to say right now, and we have a lot more distance we still have to cover with this version of Rally Road Racers. We still have the rest of the world to go get it out to. It's only open in America so far. But I have already come up with a series Bible, like a series deck of what the TV series would feel like. I would really love to turn it into a TV series like Wacky Races, which I mentioned. Um, and I would my dream would be we get to make it in 2D because I love the character design that so much of this movie, and the 2D drawings are so incredible. I think it would be such a fun show. I'd also love to see more feature length movies, them racing across other continents. But only time will tell if that is in all of our destiny. As far as projects I'm working on right now, there is one project in particular. I'm in the middle of about 4 or 5 new things, but one that I'm very excited about, which I'm making with my company, EDH Animation. It's a company my wife Lenore and I started, and then we brought my brother Jason into. He's also a writer, and I'm making it with Deepak Nair, the producer of this movie, and it's called Walk Off the Earth in Space, and it stars the band Walk Off the Earth in Canada. They're an amazing pop band. If you don't know them, you should look them up, but prepare to lose 8 hours of your life because it's like a rabbit hole. Their videos are so amazing. They're just so positive and so, yeah, they're just so much fun to watch. And we went to see a concert of theirs in Montreal when we were wrapping up Charming, and my wife looked at me like one song in and said, "We need to turn these guys into a cartoon." And she also loved Josie and the Pussycats and all those old Hanna-Barbera shows and said, "We can make a new Josie and the Pussycats with these guys." So we made a show called Walk Off the Earth in Space. We're making 14 episodes of it. We're already into animation on episode 9. And like Rally Road Racers, it's totally independent. So we're making the whole thing, and then we're going to decide where it goes. So we haven't taken it out yet to sell it. We don't know where it's going to live, but we've been making it in partnership with the band, and it's just been so much fun. And it's really music driven. They write an original song for every episode. It's really cool.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We'll have to give you guys the sneak peek of it, so you can be the first ones to review it.
We definitely will do that. Yeah, we will definitely watch that.
Excellent.
Mr. Venokur, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it, and we hope lots of families will take their kids to see the really fun Rally Road Racers.
Oh, thank you guys. And I want to thank you guys so much for spending time with me today and making me your first guest. It's such an honor. I'm so excited to have the bragging rights as you guys go on and conquer the world of interviewing people in the film industry and all your new reviews, to be able to say that I was the first one they interviewed. It's such an honor. It's been so much fun talking to you guys.
Again, we really appreciate with you coming to talk to us today. Thank you. Thank you so much.